You're watching Newsfeed, the PM edition. Now, let's go back to one of our leading stories, and it is the passing of Inkatha Freedom Party founder, that's Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. It's no secret that the IFP disputed the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on the role it allegedly played in the acts of violence of the 80s. Now, the party trying to set aside the TRC's findings, but that process was never really completed. Well, let's reflect on this now and other aspects of Buthelezi's legacy. We speak now to Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, someone who was the lead investigator in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Advocate, thank you very much for your time. And let's begin this conversation with how, as a nation, we should reflect on a legacy described as complicated by political writers and indeed observers.
Yeah, no, I think I can agree with a characterization of the legacy of Umntwana as being very complicated and as also controversial. I was involved, as you know, and as you have indicated, as head of the investigative unit in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And there are reports I will refer to, which we made and which were not well received by the Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi. For instance, I can indicate. So the manner in which his legacy is going to be received is going to depend on who is receiving the news of his demise.
Yeah.
For instance, I have in the TRC we investigated something called Operation Marion, where there were people who were taken from KZN, were in the IFP, who were trained in in the then Southwest Africa. It was Namibia in the Caprivi Strip. And the notion was that they were being trained to provide a security detail for, Chief Buthelezi. But the actual fact of the matter is that when they testified in the Amnesty Committee, they made it very clear that when they were trained, they were told that they were going to come back from the Caprivi Strip and, annihilate anyone whom they knew were members of the United Democratic Front. That is what was revealed by these people. And therefore, when we, for instance, investigated the manner in which the Makuta massacre took place, the people who performed that massacre, who later came to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and appeared before the Amnesty Committee, they gave a totally different story than the story that had been given.
Yeah.
You will know that Magnus Malan, who was the Minister of Defense, had facilitated the training of these people in Caprivi. And the aim was to do what I've already indicated, namely, to annihilate anyone who was suspected to be UDF. The tragedy, of course, was that even when they attacked the Kwamakuta family, it was the wrong family, because that was not what they had been instructed to attack. So it will depend on who is remembering the legacy.
Yeah.
I have not even talked about Boypa talk, and
Thokoza, for example.
Yes, Thokoza. I mean, people in Thokoza, must be amazed by the accounts today and yesterday and probably in the coming week, which are full of praise for who he was. And I suppose there are people who will feel that he was that kind of a person. But those people who have never been able to get an explanation about why Thokoza happened, about why Katawong happened, about why Boipatong happened. And, we will certainly not be celebrating or be remembering Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi, in ways that are praising his legacy. Those people will still be saying, what kind of a democracy are we in?
Yeah.
Where, perpetrators or people associated with perpetration of gross violations of human rights are now, celebrated as though there was no accountability needed by those people or those who think they ought to be celebrated in the way in which Chief Mangosuthu is celebrated today.
Advocate Ntsebeza, as someone, as I mentioned earlier, who was the lead investigator in the TRC, I don't want to assume that the nation knows about this, but it's up to you to take us into your confidence. Chief Buthelezi never agreed with the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In fact, he went on to try and set aside those findings. You'll tell us where that led to, but in your view, in your considered view, what made him take that posture? Was it obvious to you?
Well, if I may look at the entire history of the late Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi, you will know that even though he was a Bantustan leader like other Bantustan leaders, Matanzima in the case of the Eastern Cape where I grew up, Seb and everybody else, he, on the one breath, he considered himself as a freedom fighter in the sense that, he never went the full distance of asking for the independence of KwaZulu. But those who are political, analysts will say that was, trying to have it both ways. Whilst he as chief minister or whatever it was called, whilst he did accept, being a Bantustan leader, the mere fact that, he did not, ask for independence is neither here nor there. There were perks that came with being a chief minister of a Bantustan, and he cannot even be equated to a Desmond Tutu simply because he also supported the sanctions. The position by Desmond Tutu was different from that taken by him. He was not part and parcel of the evil system because the Bantustans were part of the system of apartheid. Yeah. So you couldn't have it both ways, but you wanted to have it both ways.
Mondli Makanya writes today in the front page of the Sunday Times. In fact, he asks a very interesting question, and that is to say, why is everybody so afraid of telling the truth about Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi? And I'm going to ask my own question related to that question, and that is there any doubt, as someone who led the TRC investigation, that the IFP was complicit in the murderous campaigns of the apartheid regime?
No, there can be no doubt. And as I say, for instance, Operation Marion, if there is any operation that one can talk about, leave alone, Boy Patong and what have you, gross violations of human rights, though they were. In this Operation Marion, there was an attempt to portray the training of IFP people in the Capital District as a security detail with Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi. Now, that was a lie to start with, because those very same people who were trained there, when they applied for amnesty in the TRC, they gave us the full picture. They told us that when they were sent to the Capital District, when they got there, they were told, when you go away from this mission, you are being trained to go back, and your targets are going to be UDF people. Mm-hmm. So this whole subterfuge, that no, they were only being trained as a security detail. Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi had his own bodyguards for a long time, long before they were. Why was it being, hidden, the true purpose of them training them? And if that was the purpose, why was Magnus Malan, Minister of Defense, involved? Why was this a sponsored, mission by the South African Defense Force? Mm. You dot your own lines, and you'll find that there was always the kind of complicity between the IFP, as led by Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi, and the South African South African Defense Force, as it then was. You draw the same kinds of conclusions when you see what happened in Katlehong, what happened in Boipatong, and who was involved there.
Yeah. In the latter part of his political life, Advocate Ntsebeza, would you say that there were some redeeming features about the legacy of Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi? Are there positives that we can draw out?
Well, there are people who will say, to the extent that he was an architect or one of the architects of the building of a so-called Zulu nation. The only thing I have a problem with when we talk about the so-called Zulu nation is the fact that the South African Constitution, which, or if you have the South African Constitution, does not talk about tribes being elevated to positions of nations. Mm. I am quite concerned that, an ethnic, community has been elevated to the status of a kingdom. Because, we are still on a long journey, and you are going to find that there are going to be other ethnic formations, like Amaxhosa in the Eastern Cape, like Abapedi in Limpopo and everywhere else. Mm. And we will never come to a stage where the democratic project of non-racism, non-tribalism, non-sexism will be achieved. It will be a dream deferred, and it will be a dream debate. Mm. So this whole notion of a Zulu nation should not be given the kind of prominence that it is now being given. We want a united, undivided South Africa where everybody is going to be treated, with dignity, irrespective of the tribe that they come from. And my own fear is that a perpetuation of a notion of a nation, of one part of an ethnic group in South Africa, is going to make the dream of us being a democracy, which is non-racial, non-tribalist, non-sectional, a pipe dream.
Advocate Ntsebeza, very quickly on this final question. The former president and the last president of the apartheid regime, F.W. de Klerk, never apologized in person for the system of apartheid. The understanding is that he did that via a video message after he had passed. Do you think that Chief Buthelezi perhaps would have been better served, or would have better served his own legacy by addressing these questions that we talk about today, about the complicity of the IFP in the apartheid regime's murderous campaigns?
Well, it would. It would have done so. And I think the appendix that was sent to us by way of him protesting and trying to indicate the extent to which he was known, it was not what we were saying in the TRC. It was an attempt to do so. In our report, there is an appendix where we, without commentary, we put about those 5 or 6 or 7 pages in which they were setting out the refutation, of everything that we had found which was negative against them. And the court case never came, and I don't think, it was in the interest of reconciliation. And remember that, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was also about not only telling the truth, but about reconciliation. I don't think it served the interest of reconciliation for no apology having been given by a person of his stature. But I suppose it was because he found that he and his party were not accountable for some of the things that we in the TRC had found on evidence him and his party to have been responsible for.
That's Advocate Dumisa Ntsebeza, a former lead investigator of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Thank you very much on your reflections today on the passing of the founding leader of the Inkatha Freedom Party, Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi.